So I wanted to offer some thoughts today about the relationship of artificial intelligence to art, right? The possibility of AI either assisting in the creation of art or fully creating art on its own. And I know I'm a little bit late to the party here, right? There's been quite a lot of discussion in the last couple months since ChatGPT came out in particular about art and AI, and I know I'm a little bit behind that curve. But I think I'm also early in the sense that this is going to be, I think, a topic that will continue to be of interest, continue to be of discussion and controversy for quite some time to come as the underlying technologies are refined, as further uses are discovered, as people's perspectives evolve. Now, this is the part where I'll usually say, I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. We are a contemporary art rock project that mingles aspects of progressive rock, post-punk, post-rock, and suggest that you check us out on Bandcamp. In this case, I think it's relevant to the topic at hand, actually, because I do in some way already make AI-generated music. I try to make music that sounds like a full band, but I think a reasonably perceptive listener will probably notice that there are all kinds of sequencing and plugins involved in the actual creation of the finished product. For instance, nothing I've ever made has involved a human hitting a physical drum, right? And, the act of creating a MIDI pattern to emulate a drum line and then having the computer spit out a recording that's kind of been conjured from nothing that sounds like drums. In some sense, you are actually having an AI create at least an aspect of your music at that point, right? Now, I think you could argue that that's not the same thing intellectually or philosophically as having the AI actually compose the song, right? But it does seem to me like maybe that's a difference of degree, not of kind. And I don't use auto-tune as an aesthetic effect, though, I'm not averse to a little bit of tasteful digital pitch correction. But of course, lots of people do, use auto-tune to get a particular sound. And in that way, you're very much collaborating with a computer to achieve your vocal output. Even, using, let's say, a reverb plugin, right? In some way, you are leveraging AI to create a sound for you. So essentially, almost everyone is already using AI to make music in some way. Now, obviously, that's kind of using a broad definition of artificial intelligence, but I don't know that there's any meaningful boundary between the algorithm in ChatGPT and the algorithm in EasyDrummer, other than just a question of complexity, right? Artificial intelligence is always kind of the term that we apply to a theoretical computer that can do a bit more than whatever we have now, right? Whatever we have now is just a computer. And that state of affairs, the kind of slow overtaking of music creation by technology, which, to be clear, I 100% participate in, that's coincided with the bar for creation of recorded music being lowered to the point where, the world is flooded with it in a way which makes it terribly hard for any individual voice to gain traction. So maybe if AI-produced music takes over entirely, if human-composed music is kind of pushed to the margins, maybe that's ultimately just the second half of a process that has actually been underway for a long time. Now, to be clear, I would love to be using live drums and a good human drummer. And if I had the resources and the profile to do that, I totally would, right? So go over to my Bandcamp. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description. And, kick me $20 and I promise I will pass that on to some, talented session musician. But that being said, I do think that there is a meaningful difference now in what seems to be suddenly everywhere, which is this kind of acceleration to the point where now these very interesting artistic artifacts, pictures and poems, particularly pictures, poems, paragraphs, text, are being created where humans are involved really only at the level of conception. And I do understand the appeal of this stuff, right? You may have seen these images of a fake John Carpenter style horror movie from the 80s called Squid Invasion from the Deep. I've had quite a lot of things in my YouTube feed lately that are all, Adventure Time in the style of an 80s fantasy film, Breaking Bad in the style of an 80s fantasy film. I actually do find this stuff intriguing and moving in kind of a strange way. It has this quality of being beamed in from an alternate universe, right? And that quality maybe is not something that you would get if you had a human doing the same thing, right? Or if you actually had Bryan Cranston dress up in wizard robes. You look at these images and all the proportions in the faces are just a tiny bit off in a way that basically comes from the fact that the brain that's creating them doesn't understand a human face in the way that you and I understand human face. And there's something otherworldly about seeing the world rendered in this kind of half understood way. It really is a bit like dreaming, I think, the production of this effortless flow of surreal images. And it's maybe, I suppose, in 10 years, this kind of awkward, blobby, early AI imagery, like, they might become kind of remembered as the defining aesthetic of our time, for better or worse. And, I'm not immune to the appeal of it. But the question is, what happens when we go beyond just these imperfect still images, right? What happens when minimal human involvement is required to create reasonably convincing, compelling novels or music, right? And not just composition as sheet music, which can be fed into MIDI. That already has existed for quite some time. But, very sophisticated imitations of the sonic qualities of a particular artist, where, if you want new Nirvana or new classic Genesis, that can be achieved. Obviously, I'm just as much of a sucker as the next person for the idea of infinite Genesis, right? But this still seems overall like a very ominous state of affairs to me. To start with, it seems to me like it's very likely that it's going to reduce or eliminate the role of humans in things like soundtracks or royalty-free music, at least for productions that aren't very large scale or high budget or trying to cultivate a particular sort of boutique image. If you want background music that sets a particular mood for a scene, if you want kind of a slow reverby cover of a 90s pop song to put into your film trailer, I think we're probably maybe only a couple years, and I'm not any kind of an expert at all, but intuitively I'd say maybe a couple years away from having the ability to dial that up with a few keystrokes. Now, if you're a viewer of a scene where that kind of thing is being done, that's probably not going to change your subjective experience of it much, if at all, right? What it will do, I think, is eliminate the margins where a fair number of musicians are currently able to hammer out some kind of a respectable living. And it's going to reduce or eliminate a venue where, obscure music, which might need a boost, can get some kind of little bit of exposure. So that's a bad outcome that I would put the odds of at about, I think, 100%. But even outside of, the particular case of like advertisements, film scores, I think it's also going to have the effect of flooding the market eventually. And this is maybe something we'll see, I don't know, in 5 or 10 years, give or take, maybe sooner. Flooding the market with a bunch of familiar, accessible, soulless work, which will be of even less economic value than what's already out there. And I don't actually think people will resist that very much, right? I mean, so much of the engagement that most people have with music right now is, playlisting for a particular mood or a particular activity, or to have a set of things that are all in a roughly similar style. And, I mean, the encroachment of artificially generated music isn't going to bother anyone who is experiencing music in that way. And I mean, as a listener or as a reader, if you want to think about other media, I don't think it's going to be ultimately good beyond providing a certain surface level comfort, right? If your goal is to have an endless feed of music that's basically good enough to be better than silence, that completely already exists, right? What you're going to get will just be the same thing, but with less soul, but a greater superficial resemblance to things that you already know. And if you're someone who doesn't want that, if you're someone who does want music or novels or whatever, that is actually created in a way that is in line with the ostensible, nobler values of art, then the pool of resources, the pool of attention for that is going to be further dried up, further undermined by what's basically an infinite flow of very appealing noise. Now, what do I mean by the ostensible values of art? Well, I mean, maybe this is pretentious, but art should be a way of approaching big questions about the meaning of life, right? A way of trying to understand different perspectives, a means of trying to capture the subjective experience of a particular moment, a way of trying to understand oneself in a different way, a means of trying to take risks to make something new, right? None of those are original thoughts, but I think that those values endure. And to be totally fair, a great deal of current music, fiction, etc., are not made with any of those goals in mind. And even the things that are made with those goals in mind may not come close to achieving them, right? But those still seem to me like key values in the creation and appreciation of art. And the creation of something that cannot, by its nature, achieve any of those goals, right? Because it is made automatically by a set of algorithms, by something that is not human, is an insult. The releasing of floods of that into the world to take up oxygen from the work which does set those goals out and at least try to achieve them is an insult to art. It's an insult to the practice of art. It's an insult to artists. I find myself profoundly insulted by the possibility of it, the inevitability of it, I think, though, to be totally clear, I am not an expert of any kind. Now, I don't think I'm saying anything particularly original here, but the point is very close to my heart. It's something I feel strongly about, and it felt important to me to get on the record saying that. I made a video recently asking if music was dead, right? And I suggested in that video that maybe music has reached a natural point of permanent stylistic exhaustion as a result of the tools now being available for the essentially infinite creation and manipulation of sound with minimal effort. And maybe this is, in fact, the final stage of that, right? Or will be when the thing that I'm talking about comes to pass. A point in history where cultural production becomes truly infinite, truly valueless, truly incapable of originality, where, to the extent that it's had any of those things up until now, the last remaining bit is pushed out, and where the noise is too loud, too ever-present, too distracting, for there to be really any point in making a meaningful effort to drown or shut it out. Now, I'm not unaware of the broader possibilities of AI to save and enhance human lives on big and small scales. I'm aware of the idea that AI might expand access to quality healthcare. I'm aware of the idea that it could, for instance, be used to generate solutions to climate change. I don't disrespect the importance of those, but they do suggest to me a purgatorial future in which AI is used to save and extend our essentially pointless, empty lives. And on that encouraging note, thank you much, everyone, for your attention, and I'll see you next week.